Cupertino is a city with a rich past and rapidly changing future. Today we'll find out how the Cupertino Historical Society Museum will help preserve this rich heritage as we join Judith Carson-Croes, Chair of the Museum Organization Committee, next on Take 53.
While climbing, secure figure 8 knot to harness.
Motivation is the key to fighting illiteracy.
Take it to the top!
When taking pictures in low light, always use high-speed film.
All right, guys, come on!
In scouting, what you read is what you do.
What?
And your parents think bike helmets will just keep you safer. If you want to be cool, helmets are the rule.
Welcome back to Take 53. I'm Susan Robinson, and today our focus is on the new Cupertino Historical Society Museum. Today our guest is Judith Carson-Croes, Chair of the Museum Organization Committee. Judith, thanks for joining us today on Take 53.
You're welcome.
First of all, how did you become so involved in the Cupertino Historical Society Museum?
Well, actually, I became involved with the Historical Society first. I was a Director of Learning Services for Cogswell College, and we moved the college down to Cupertino in 1985 from San Francisco. And the Historical Society members were just so fantastic and welcoming us to the community that we started getting associated with them and active in some of their events and things. So I became a member about '86, I would say, and started working with them on some things and knew that they were getting a museum in order. And at that point, about '85, I think, is also when they started thinking that the museum would go into the new community center. And in '88, it was in fact a fact that it would be in the community center. And I was asked if I would start working on the museum organization, and we formed a committee at the beginning of '89, and this is where we are right now. We are in fact organizing the beginning of the museum, all of the collection, the exhibits, and everything that goes along with the museum operation.
That's great. So all those things you mentioned are what your committee is working on right now?
Yes.
To kind of get the museum started?
Right.
Okay. As far as the Cupertino Historical Society, how long have they been in existence?
Well, they were incorporated as a nonprofit, private group in April of 1966. So they've been around for a little over 20 years. Okay, so they've been around since 1966. How did we just come to get the historical museum now? Well, that went through many, many stages, actually. In fact, part of their bylaws does say to collect and conserve the collection and artifacts of the Cupertino area, and eventually to display those, which automatically implies that there would be a museum. And they investigated many different places, from the Parish House to McClellan Ranch to a variety of different places to house the collection. But in a museum, and in order to conserve your objects, you have to have correct conditions. You have to have a good climate. It has to be secure and protective of the objects. And none of those sites were really very appropriate. So the city, actually, the Department of Parks and Recreation, stepped in at some point and came up with the idea of the community center, and that the museum would be one of several different organizations that could be located in there. So then the museum, that then became the site of the museum.
I see. You mentioned that up until now, they have the artifacts you have not had a place to be housed. I'm curious, where have all these things been located in the meantime?
Well, just about everywhere. Not atypical of historical society museums, I would think. Most of the objects are in people's homes. They've been in garages, and they've been in basements, and under beds, and in attics, and it's well protected, you know, as individuals can protect them. But they have not, I don't think, ever been in one place completely and displayed as a museum collection.
I see. So they're ready for a home.
They are definitely ready for a home.
So where will the museum be located as part of the community center?
The museum will occupy a little over 1,000 square feet just to the left-hand side as you enter the community center. So we're one of the very first areas that a visitor will see as they come into the center.
I see. So what types of things will be displayed in the museum?
Well, we have a rather large, over 3,000, at least 3,000 object collection right now, and it's quite diverse. We have a lot of farm implements, obviously, from the agricultural time of Cupertino. A lot of those probably will not be in the museum. They're awfully large and metal, and a lot of those probably will be outside someplace in a display. But there are a lot of fantastic historical photographs and smaller items that were used by the pioneers in the mid-1800s. Everything from irons, real irons, to other smaller kitchen and household items, and you know, a variety of things that people used in their homes and out of their homes, and a lot of things that were used in the early schools, inkwells and that sort of thing. So those will all make up a lot of what we display in the museum.
Judith, what are some things that we might be able to see included in the museum collection?
Well, there will be a variety of things. As I mentioned, we have over 3,000 objects, and they include everything really that was used by Cupertino residents from the pioneer days really up to, I would say, about the last 50 years or so. And they include everything from the very large objects, the agricultural implements, for instance, that were used in the apricot farming areas and various things, to some that were used by people in their homes. That includes kitchen objects, household, personal objects, hand mirrors, etc. A lot of things from schools that were existing in the early 1900s and the late 1800s. Inkwells, for instance, that is part of that. There will be a lot of things that people will recognize as really very personal things that their ancestors used during the 1800s and 1900s.
It's great. It sounds fascinating. Well, we need to take a break. But when we come back, we'll find out more about the new Cupertino Historical Society Museum and special programs that they'll offer.
Tall ships, the great sailing vessels of the last century. Quiet waterfront communities and huge urban seaports. Shipwrecks, all are part of our great American heritage. A few of these great sailing ships and paddle boats remain to keep alive for us the lore and skills of another age. They have much to teach us, but like other valuable things from our past, they must be cared for and maintained. They teach us of the courage and adventure of the seagoing life that helped build this nation, and the self-reliance and perseverance that are part of the American character. Join us in keeping our maritime heritage alive and vibrant. Preserve and protect it for the enjoyment of all by supporting maritime preservation efforts in your community. Don't give up the ships.
And we're back on Take 53. I'm Susan Robinson with Judith Carson-Croes, Chair of the Museum Organization Committee. You mentioned a few things that will be included in the museum. When will it actually open?
Well, I don't have an exact date, but I know it will be spring of 1990, so we're thinking probably end of March, April, if the construction is still on target.
Great, and it sounds like you have a lot of wonderful things to be included in it. Where do you come by these items? Do people just donate them, or how do you come across all these items to be included?
Well, most of them, I would say, and I'm fairly new to this particular museum and historical society, but I would say the majority are donated. There are a lot of old Cupertino families and still involved in the historical society, and a lot of those items have come from them or from their estates.
That's great. What types of, well, would you say there's a main attraction at the museum?
Well, I think the main attraction really is the first-time display of Cupertino history in a very tangible form, and that will be all of the historical objects that people will be able to associate with the old name Cupertino families.
So this is actually the first time that these items have been on display for the public to see?
Yes, well, as a total collection it will be. There have been, we have participated in a lot of different things, and there is a traveling trunk, I think, as part of the program. So that includes, that's gone out to schools and to various Cupertino events, and that includes some of the collection. So those items, as well as a large one, the fire truck, which probably people remember seeing, they have been seen, but they have not seen the entire collection.
So you mentioned the traveling trunk.
Yes.
I know that's one of the special programs that the Cupertino Historical Society has offered.
Yes.
And will this also be done through the museum, or is this something that the Historical Society does separately?
Well, it will be through the museum now. In fact, that's probably been our mini museum up until this date. That is very much a concern of the Historical Society. Even when it started, they wanted that involvement in the Cupertino schools. They wanted the Cupertino children to be aware of their heritage. And that traveling trunk was put together and has gone out to innumerable schools in the past several years. In fact, I think one year it visited 26 different classes. And the children write back and express their interest in the different things that were shown to them. So that's been a very popular thing.
That's great. So the young people of the city are able to see something about their heritage.
Right.
Now, what things do they see in the traveling trunk?
Well, again, it's a variety of things. It has the iron that women used to iron the clothes with, and it has some of the school items, which the kids probably get a lot of fun out of looking. It's the inkwell and pens and different things that were used in the schools in the early 1800s.
I see. So do the schools have to request that the traveling trunk come to their school, or do you just contact them, and how does that program work?
Well, that could be done either way, as a matter of fact. We were very aware of the different schools in the area, so we have made contact with them. And one of our Historical Society and Museum members, Hazel Fretwell, has been most intimately involved in that, and she has established contact with most of the schools in the area. So they do know who to contact if they would like to have that visit made.
Now, is this strictly the elementary schools, or does this go into high school culture classes, or what schools does this pertain to?
It has gone in primarily to primary schools, but certainly could go into any. In fact, what we could do is we could orient it to a little bit older student or different types of classes, whatever the class is dealing with the time, for instance, in their history. We could certainly put together a trunk that would be appropriate to that class.
That's great. So that's one of your special programs. What other special programs will the new museum offer to the community?
Well, we haven't gotten all of our programs down on paper, so that's still in the organizational stages. But one thing, since we do not have a lot of space, one thing we have been thinking about is to put out a lot more of our collection into some of the public places. Certainly with some of the companies, we've had a fairly good response from some companies. They would like to see some historical materials in their lobbies and things like that. So we will be reaching out to the community with our collection via companies, via schools, via other community organizations.
I know that the Historical Society has given speeches at groups in the past. Will these continue, and what types of organizations would you be targeting to speak at?
Well, actually, a lot of the speaking has been done at the Historical Society meetings themselves, where we invite speakers in.
Oh, I see.
Now, obviously, those same speakers or historical members could always give a speech to any organization in the Cupertino or even greater Santa Clara area, if asked. You know, we'd be very open to that. We have a lot of very interesting speakers who come. Some are members of the Historical Society, some are not. They speak on Northern California history. We recently had Mr. H. Allen Bidwell, who was whose ancestor was John Bidwell and kind of founding farmer of Chico, California. So we had him speaking recently.
I see.
That's the kind of thing that we do. One of our members writes a regular column for the Cupertino Scene. That's Henrietta Marcotte. She writes on the roots of Cupertino.
I see. I know that you will be organizing the items in the museum, and there's not room for everything. Will you do tours with school children depending on themes and what you have out, or how do you plan to have tours go through, or other special projects like that?
Again, the educational part is very much part of our goal in the museum. So certainly we would be very open to working with all of the different schools and their principals or teachers or whatever. And we will have classes of students coming in. We will probably do some training of the teachers if they would like to give them a little background of the history so that they can as well be guides for their students. And again, we'll have the traveling trunk and we can take out other parts of the collections into the schools themselves.
Okay, that's great. So those are a few of the special programs. And is that how you will basically organize what will be on exhibit, is by themes, or how do you plan to set the displays up in the museum?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We haven't decided that entirely. Probably what we would like to do is we would like to start off an exhibit with the very early part of Cupertino's history. So with the settling in the mid-1800s and the pioneers, and then bring it up to a little bit more contemporary, so we will have kind of a span of Cupertino history in the first exhibit. We will be changing exhibits. Some of those will be by special theme. For instance, we would also like to certainly deal with our pre-Anglo settlement and deal with some of the Native American settlement in the area as well. So we will have some special thematic exhibits as we see the need, or sometimes by request. If there's a particular individual or group who would like a focus in the exhibit, we will certainly take that into consideration.
Great, but we need to take a break.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll talk about future goals of the Cupertino Historical Society Museum.
Somewhere a child lies crying. Somewhere an old man shivers in the dark. Somewhere a family's dreams burn to the ground. Somewhere somebody needs help. Please support your local Red Cross. There is a need in your hometown because somewhere is closer than you think.
Out! And stay out! Don't you move. Mommy be right back.
Give your cat a break. Child-proof your home.
And we're back on Take 53 with Judith Carson-Croes of the Cupertino Historical Society Museum. I noticed that one of the quotes on the flyer that you gave me for the museum stated that it's a museum for the preservation of the past, the present, and for the future enrichment of the Cupertino community. I understand about the past. What do you mean by the present and future in the museum?
Well, I think this is it's a very interesting and we hope very contemporary view for historical museums, and that is the importance not just of a very rich past, but how the future and the present becomes the past. So we would like to see our entire history on a continuum and note the changes in the area, the changes in the people, the changes in the industry that come in. Obviously, Cupertino was originally very much an agricultural area and then became more and more industrial, and then obviously became part of the Silicon Valley boom with the electronics. And the companies that settled in this area are very much a part of, we consider, our present right now and our very recent past, and certainly our future. So those things we would like to include in some of the collection that we get for the museum and for the display. So again, people can relate a little bit more. This is not, we don't want the museum and our collection to be seen as just a, kind of a dead thing. We want it to be a living thing. We want it to be something that is very, I think, contemporary and that people can relate to. So as the community changes with, for instance, a different kind of, for instance, our settlers were primarily Northern European and from Ireland and England and some from Italy. And that changes too. I mean, we have a new community around us. We have a Hispanic community. We have a large Asian community. And we want to reflect their interests and their participation in the community of Cupertino. And certainly, to get people interested in the museum, you want to make that very, I think, appropriate to them. So they want to see some of what their contributions have been too. So that's what we'll try to do in our living museum.
That's great, the concept of a living museum. And it brings up another question. You mentioned you want to do that so that the community can relate to the museum. How do you plan to involve the community in the museum so that they feel like a part of it?
Well, one thing is we will certainly try and be aware of all of the different community groups and individuals that make up Cupertino and its immediately surrounding areas. The different organizations that exist, the churches, the schools, the community centers of the outlying areas certainly. Any group, I think, that exists in Cupertino is something that we have to be aware of. We need to set up very good talking and listening relationships with them so that they feel involved in what we do and that we feel involved in what they do. And hopefully, it doesn't happen overnight, obviously, but over time, they will become more and more part of what we put on in our museum.
So for residents who feel like they do have something to contribute that's part of our present in Cupertino, do they just come to you if they feel like they have something to donate, or?
Well, what we are doing right now in terms of the donations in our collection is writing a collection management policy. And this is going to be kind of our guideline as to what is appropriate to accept and what is not. And there are certain things that museums have to abide by. For instance, there are all sorts of excuse me, federal codes dealing with wildlife and dealing with American Indian rights with their artifacts and things. So we write all of these in our policy, and this gives us a guideline as to what is appropriate for the collection and what isn't. But obviously, anyone who thinks that there is something that they have or he or she has that would be appropriate can contact us either when we get a museum number at the museum number or at the Historical Society itself. We would also like to urge any Cupertino resident or anyone outside of the area to join the Historical Society and become involved at that level, because that's pretty much the basis of our museum still. That's where it all started.
Okay. And will the museum, is it run on a completely volunteer basis?
Right now, all of the individuals involved in the operation of the museum and the starting up of the museum are volunteers. Eventually, what we would like to see, certainly, and I would like to see this probably at the start of the year if possible, is to hire a museum professional to head the museum and its operations, and then perhaps still rely a lot on volunteers to act as docents and to help with the school tours and that sort of thing. So there will be a lot of volunteers always involved.
Okay. How is funding done for the museum then?
Well, right now we are getting almost all of our funding through the Historical Society's efforts. We do have a separate organization, a fundraising committee that was set up as part of the museum organization committees. They are working on some fundraising campaigns. The first one really that the Historical Society did was in June. That was our first official fundraiser that we had with our barbecue, and we charged $25 for all of the guests. And all of the proceeds of that then went towards the museum after obviously paying off what it cost to put the barbecue on. So we had a good response from the Cupertino community for that.
That's great. I know the museum will be opening in the spring, and you have a wish list.
As always.
Yes, things that you need. What are some of those things that you would like to receive from the community?
Well, we have a lot of things. Actually, some of them entail tangible things that have to deal with the organization of the collection and the running of the museum itself. On the top of our list might be a computer and printer. We do need that. What we have to do with the entire collection is go through every single object and accession it. We have to apply a number to that. So one of the key things in any museum operation is documentation. So documentation means lots and lots of little numbers and lots of names and description. So in order to make that an easier task would be computerizing it, which is something we would really like to do. Right now we do have an inventory and they're all on cards, and we would like to elaborate that and make sure that it stays updated, and that so the computer would be, you know, very nice thing to receive on our wish list. A lot of other things involving services. We would like to put our display cases together, and materials for that would come in handy, as well as anyone who has the technical skills, carpentry for instance, to help us build the display cases and actually install them. So there are a lot of things that involve putting the displays together, art, paper, anything having to do with writing the text out. For instance, if there are businesses around that could help us put some of the labels together, that would be a very needed item.
So where can people call if they have time or talents that they would like to donate?
Well, if they have the time, the talents, they have things to donate in terms of the organization, they can certainly call me. And my number is 415-695-1251. If they have funds that they would like to donate, or if they have storage space to house the off-site part of our collection, they could call the chair of the fundraising or finance committee, and that is Sandra Basel, and her number is 408-248-5053, and that's in San Jose.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me on Take 53 today, and I wish you and the Cupertino Historical Society and their new museum continued success.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining me on Take 53.